I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, home to the one and only Story Cycle system. Do you want people to actually give a crap about you and your purpose-driven company? Then our proven system will help you tell them a better friggin' story. And that's the secret sauce, folks. You gotta have a better, clear story. You can get started right now by downloading your 64-page DIY brand story strategy workbook at businessofstory.com. It's filled with examples, links to tutorial videos, and will help you clarify your story to grow your revenue and amplify your impact. And if you're really proud of how your brand story comes together, let me know. We might put you on our show to share your new narrative with the world. So download your Story Cycle Guide right now as you listen to today's show.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Hey, welcome back to Business of Story. Have we got a great show for you this week? And I want to start by giving a great big thank you to Phil Mershon over at Social Media Examiner. Without you, Phil, I perhaps would not have met today's guest, the fiery and fun Cassie Roma, who comes to us all the way from New Zealand. The interwebs. Here's the deal. You probably know Phil and his team over at Social Media Examiner, headed by Michael Stelzner. They're the producers of the world's largest conference for social media marketers called Social Media Marketing World. Makes sense, right? Well, they've been so kind to invite me back for a third time to present my all-new Business of Story 90-minute storytelling workshop to kick off the 2018 event in San Diego on February 28th. I am so pumped. We had over 800 people in the room last March, and I hope you will be among them this coming February. Anyhow, Phil also invited me to host a panel on brand storytelling with Cassie Roma and Mira Rodriguez, a business storyteller at Microsoft. I, of course, said absolutely I'd be honored to, and I reached out to get acquainted with both Cassie and Mira by having them on our show. Mira will be joining us on the Business of Story in a couple of weeks, and you can meet us all at the Social Media Marketing World this February, so reserve your place now. As for Cassie, you are going to meet her right alongside me on today's show. She grew up in San Diego and has been in New Zealand for the past 15 years, working in the trenches of omni-channel brand storytelling with some of the biggest brands down under. As you'll hear, or better yet, experience with Cassie, she is passionate about storytelling across mediums, both emerging and traditional. Cassie is currently the GM of content marketing at New Zealand Media and Entertainment, where her mission is to lead, motivate, and take a team of groundbreaking content marketers, storytellers, and project managers to the next level in a media environment. Cassie has worked with many industries, from travel to banking. She's also helped grow powerful social media teams, driving innovation, community engagement, customer service, and reporting standards at places like Air New Zealand, ANZ Bank, Mighty River Power, and AA Travel. Alongside creative storytelling for businesses and media, Cassie has also made her mark as a leadership evangelist, event and keynote speaker, and vocal advocate for the LGBTQ community, and is the new co-chair of the Auckland Pride Board. And as you'll learn, she is a keen fan of buttery Chardonnay and Elton John, two things we both have in common. In addition to those earth-shattering insights, you'll learn the importance of wooing your customers through stories. What to look for in a story to make it uniquely your own and relevant to and resonant with your audiences. examples of some of her favorite brand storytelling campaigns, and why she believes there is a renaissance of traditional marketing and storytelling happening in our industry around the world. That and more on today's Business of Story with Cassie Roma. Let's get started. Cassie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Park. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is going to be an interesting one for me because I am going to be learning right alongside our listeners all about you. I tried to do some digging, and you have a fascinating bio that I can't wait to dive into the middle of. You are a San Diego transplant who was running around New Zealand, apparently, for many, many years and decided to call Auckland your home. And you're in the world of storytelling and communications and all that. Tell us a little bit more about you. Give us your backstory.
Yeah, wow. So backstory is definitely San Diego native, child of summer, rainbows and butterflies, all of those things you could conjure up in your mind, especially when you've been an expat for 15 years and really miss home. So yeah, just grew up in San Diego, went to school at UC Santa Barbara, followed the sun even further, just a bit north of LA there, and studied Spanish language and literature and psychology of all things. And then I fell in love with a Kiwi bloke and moved to New Zealand and have been here for a decade and a half. And then the past decade and a half, I've tried to follow my passions, which has always been storytelling, mostly in the written form and in photography, through work and life and parenthood and, marriage, divorce, all of the other things that happen in life. And have found a really, really amazing place here in Australasia to be able to kind of affect the marketing world through storytelling. It's been a fascinating time, even, being a part of it, but to sit back and think through the last 15 years. I'm just amazed at where the world is and how we're going, but that there's a huge, huge trend, especially here, where we're going back to the basics of fundamental storytelling as a huge part of marketing and marketing ROI. And I'm absolutely stoked about that.
What was it, do you think, growing up in San Diego and even going back to your little girl days that made you so fascinated about storytelling?
If I go back to the roots, even my name. So Roma was my middle name when I was born. And it was the first name of my grandmother. And my grandmother was an English war bride who met my grandfather, who fought in the Battle of the Bulge and was injured in Oxford, England. She came over to the United States at 17 years old. For being a girl from Oxford, she was into her fashion. She was into music, society, all of those things. She literally jumped off of a train with a baby on her hip as a teenager into a field in the middle of Missouri. And I think coming from her, she was the key storyteller of our life, of my life, of our cousins' lives. She used to sing songs, old songs. She used to tell us stories of olden days. Her name being Roma harkens back to the Romantic gypsies and the Romany gypsies. So we were always being told stories from Grandma Roma. And I think then she really it was born into me this love of just sitting and listening to people. I can just sit and watch people for hours and listen to their stories. And I don't remember a time in my life, even as a little girl, where that hasn't fascinated me. And then through school, I can remember days when being so excited when teachers said, get out your book and your pen and start writing. And my friends would just groan. They would just hate it. And I was the most excited little nerd on the planet in those moments. I think it was just born out of a true passion for how do we tell stories? How do we use language? How do we build visual imagery in our minds through the written word? It's always fascinated me, and it still does to this day.
And do you think when you were going to UC Santa Barbara that you were planning on being storytelling and marketing?
I really wanted to be a lyricist for Elton John and potentially play the tambourine in his band at some point.
Yeah, but Bernie Taupin already had that.
And Bernie, actually, this is a real secret I've never told anybody. One of the main reasons I went to UC Santa Barbara was because Bernie Taupin lives up just out of Santa Barbara. And I got to kind of hang out with Bernie a little bit and just absolutely blew my mind. But Bernie Taupin was a huge fundamental player in my life as a storyteller as well. I used to just dive into his lyrics and try to understand that marriage of melody and words and where these young men, when they wrote these things, were coming from. So at UC Santa Barbara, I had no idea how I was going to integrate storytelling into my life, but I did spend a lot of time writing poetry and lyrics and working with little local bands and doing anything I could to just be around creative people. It at the time it didn't hit home that I was hanging around with inherent storytellers. You know, a musician was a musician and a data geek was a data geek. But what we were all doing is we were congregating and telling stories. And the more I look back on it, that was a real magical time in my life.
And Bernie Taupin, so I'm with you, one of the most fabulous lyricists of all time, I think, too. And I did the exact same thing. When I was growing up, my very first concert I ever went to in the 9th grade was Elton John in 1977, I believe it was, in the Seattle Center Coliseum. And my very first album was Caribou I ever bought in my life. And I read the cover to cover on the album notes and the lyrics and whatever. And of all of his songs, what was your favorite? What was the lyric that caught your attention the most?
You know, my mother is absolutely going to hate this because it's the one song of Elton. So I've seen Elton John 20 times in 20 years. And my mom would drive from San Diego to Santa Barbara back to LA just to kind of feed the Elton addiction when I was younger. But the first thing that really hit home to me was Indian Sunset.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The way that Bernie just told this story, and then two little Englishmen singing a story about Native Americans and the impact that our culture has had on their culture. It just really hit home. And I can remember just holding the original album and the liner notes and reading it and listening to it on an LP player. And just as a young girl going, oh my God, there's imagery, there's words, there's music, there's melody. It's taken me on this complete emotive journey. So that was the one, Park. It was, yeah.
Yeah, I know the one well on Madman Across the Water.
That's right.
My favorite, the one that still haunts me most today, was the very last track on the B-side of Caribou called Ticking.
Ticking.
He talks about a young man that loses his mind and goes berserk in a bar and kills people. I mean, I guess it's really a sign of the times, although it was written back in 1974 or 75. But it's only Elton on his piano, and he does amazing thing called text painting that I learned about when I was studying music at WSU, where he would play this. He would sing, obviously, the lyrics, but his piano would mimic the emotion that he was also, trying to get across in that lyric. And if you really sit down and read through that lyric, and I'm geeking out here, it's almost like you're reading a news report of what went down, and he's singing it right out of the pages of the New York Times. It's really, really quite amazing.
That was going to be my actual second choice of song, because that one, even to this day, we listened to it a week ago, because I've only ever heard him sing it once live, and it was absolutely superb, and the emotion was still there, and he drove this audience who probably maybe four of us knew all the words.
Right. The one song that I play of his all the time is Talking Old Soldiers. That's another brilliant one.
And I could talk about Elton for about...
I guess we should move on.
Another favorite, yes.
Hey, you know what? We're going to actually get a chance to do that, folks. And I hope you'll come and join us, because Cassie and I are going to be with Mira Rodriguez, a storyteller from Microsoft, at Social Media Marketing World in San Diego, February 28th through March 2nd. And we'll be doing a panel discussion together on business and brand storytelling. And before the show is out, Cassie, don't let me forget, Phil Mershon is looking for a title for our panel discussion. So I told him you and I would come up with that on today's show, but we'll hold on to that till the end of the show. Let's keep moving on. So you found yourself in New Zealand, and all the work you've done is always, looks like you've been around branded content, marketing, and really bringing a storytelling flair. Take us now to this next chapter in your life of where you were applying storytelling in business.
So I think completely through my professional journey, I've tried to find a little niche of where I could potentially inject storytelling. So when we first moved to New Zealand, and I was working full time, I just had I had a very young family, a 6-month-old who was born in the States, and then we moved over here when she was 6 months old. And I basically went into a role with a local council working with events and city promotion, which was just perfect for a very young, hungry marketer. And I was able to write a lot and do a lot of the writing and the marketing, kind of the hierarchy of messaging around what was happening locally. So that tied me here as an expat. It tied me to the community, but it also allowed me enough freedom creatively to kind of affect the community around me, which was pretty magical. And from that job, then I moved into more tourism sectors. So it was based in domestic tourism in New Zealand. So I was able to travel around and just talk to people, get their stories. And then a lot of the work that I did started to translate less from print, less from advertorial and editorial, and you're out of home, you're traditional, and more into the digital space. So this was a time a decade ago, and New Zealand's still catching up with digital. But this was a time where digital was brand new to New Zealand. And, people would talk about SEO and SEM. And luckily the Googs was around, and I'd go and Google, what does this mean? And then just spend a lot of time being hungry to understand the actual drivers of the algorithm in the background. And from there, it was basically a learning to speak the language of both storytelling traditionally and digital for me. And I found that's where a huge passion was undertaken in my life and my career, to never, ever forget the human at the end of a story, but also to remember the onus and the importance of a click and being able to measure ROI in a new digital world. And it was just about that time, too, that we had our first and second large earthquakes in Christchurch. They were devastating to the entire country. And I could remember the big Christchurch earthquake that hit in February. And basically everything went down. We had no phone lines. We couldn't get in touch with our people. And basically I was the only one with social media at that point on my computer screen. It was Twitter was up. And Twitter became our lifeline to our people and to news and to understanding how many people were lost, how many buildings were down, what was happening, where people should go for help. And it was from there was born my kind of social media career. Even Californian girl who can do this, you are now in charge of social media. And from there, that storytelling side of social and digital and marrying brand has become a very firm part of my life and passions.
Well, and it sounds like, too, when you were starting 15 years ago, storytelling wasn't a thing like it is today. I mean, all real good brand marketers and communicators have always used storytelling. They've never just raised their hand and called it out and said, hey, I'm storytelling here. So when you were bringing it, did you feel like you were a little bit different over there? I mean, because you were bringing a different way to communicate, where back then, I can remember, 12, 15 years ago, people were really sort of getting lazy, at least in my terms in marketing, and just, features, functions, benefits, buy now, and not really romancing the customer anymore, just kind of hammering them over the head with messages.
I love the way that you just put that. I always call it romancing the customer. I always say this very similar thing. I say we're wooing the customer to fill that proverbial funnel with storytelling. To answer your question, yes. It's not only the funny accent, I think, that sticks out here, but the fact that I am super, super passionate about the importance and the impetus that should be put on the story about the brand. There are a few New Zealand brands that just do a superb, superb job at storytelling. And they really nail it. But what I find differently from an American or even a European kind of context is that New Zealand has a lot of very small businesses, super duper small little businesses that work with, anywhere from 1 employee to 10, and to get the idea of storytelling across the line there, and that a story can be told in a traditional banner ad or in a piece of print and paper. Getting that over the line takes a lot of time and passion. And sometimes for me, I feel like I've always been that person on the edge a little bit who's gone, guys, look over here. What's your story? What do you stand for? How is a human being going to connect with you so that they know you were going to give them some sort of value, not just in your product, but in your promise to them. So that romancing, that wooing of the customer, it's always been the underlining belief of how I think marketing should be and should continue to be. And that the digital space, our social space, all of those things are just new channels. They're just ways in which we can now storytell in a more, I guess, reflective and personal way.
Right. There are new channels that I think people falsely believe connect us more as humans, but they don't really. They're a cheap connection at best, unless you can really open yourself up, tell a story, share your story, appreciate, empathize with other people's stories, and start connecting that way. But, for me anyway, Cassie, there's still nothing that beats mano a mano, being right in front across the table from people. And I just think we're losing that. I think people are relying so heavily on social, digital, online marketing channels that they forget you're missing the humanity if you're not actually with that individual.
I agree so much so on this. And I think being an American living in a very small country that is super far away from most places, the most important parts of my career have actually happened when I've been able to travel overseas and sit across the table from somebody like you, or to meet and network with people at social media marketing world. And it's so important that you do sit at that table. And that's a beautiful part of New Zealand too, with the small business culture, is that a lot of the time you do know who you're working with. You do know what their values are, and not just what they're giving you, but the human behind the business. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I like to say that a lot of the secret sauce that I do bring to big organizations here and otherwise, that I can walk into a room and come out with friends. We might be strangers in the beginning, but we come out with friends. And I think people buy from people, do business with people. And that's all about knowing your story and you knowing my story and trusting each other.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen your videos online, and I can see you just do have a very terrific spirit about you. So I can see where people would be gravitated towards you, but that's just not enough anymore. I mean, you got to have that spirit, but then also that ability to bewitch them a little bit with story, to connect really on a human term. So I want to ask you, I talked, of course, to so many business storytellers and brand storytellers. How do you define storytelling in business?
Ooh, that's a big one. I think storytelling in business is any touch point with a customer or a potential customer that connects with them. So it can be a deep connection, it can be an emotional connection, it can be a functional connection, but storytelling is that connection, an actual moment of aha, or I'm going to come back to that place, or 5 days down the line when somebody's thinking about buying a competitor's product, they go, I actually saw that thing and it resonated with me, it connected with me, therefore I might go to that other brand instead. Storytelling is so wide. It's not just your big, deep hero brand, well-produced videos that have huge spend behind them. I think you can tell very good stories in banner ads. I think you can tell great stories in podcasts. I absolutely love the rebirth of the birth of podcasting, but the rebirth of, I guess, auditory storytelling.
Right. Oral storytelling. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely love the fact that this is coming back and geeking out on all of the different things we can learn just through language. So storytelling is everything all at once to me.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier some brands, local brands there that are doing a good job. Could you give us an example of that? And so then we can also put it in the show notes and our listeners can go and check it out for themselves.
Sure. One of the funkiest, coolest new brands that I love from New Zealand is a shoe brand of all things. And they make these wool shoes that are warm in winter and cool in summer. They're called Allbirds. And
Allbirds?
Allbirds. And their stories are really cool. They're really Kiwi. I think they're actually located in New York now as well. And they just do a really, really good fundamental job at branding and telling their story. And they're fairly new. I own 2 pairs of Allbirds now, and they are the most comfortable things I've ever put on my feet. And I will continue to tell everybody that. Just, go out, try them on, throw them in the washing machine, wash them if they get dirty, and be real cool. So Allbirds is a great one.
And you love it because so you've talked about the brand and you love the product and its functionality. So you will live that story and share that story. Do they do anything interesting on their website or with their brand that you feel like is different and really coaxes you into their story?
I think what they do is, and you hit on it just a bit earlier, was that they're genuine and they share a little bit of that Kiwi quirky humor without being cynical at all, and without being too big brandish. They just do a really good job of their storytelling across social. They do a smart job of targeting the right people. They do a good retargeting. So I also look at the, that geeky aspect of the retargeting parts of stories and and figuring out where people's journeys take them. And they've just fundamentally are doing a very good job.
Have you heard of the brand Kingswood skis?
Yes.
So they downloaded my workbook, which thank you very much for that, Kingswood skis, to work through their brand. And so I jumped over to check out their website a couple months ago, and they're already really great storytellers. I'm a skier. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and was on skis literally like with the rest of my 6 siblings when we were 5 years old. And so I've been all over the place, and they capture this so well at kingswoodskis.com. It says skiing should be simple. And I love this next real short body of copy, at least in that moment when it all comes together and you are floating effortlessly through fresh snow. This is the moment that we seek out. This is the moment we build skis for. We worry about camber and side cuts and 1-degree edge bevels so that you don't have to. We build each pair just for you based on who you are and how you ski.
Love that.
So they place you at the center of the story, the ski buyer. They talk about the emotion that you experience when you're doing this. So they say, hey, we get you. We are you. Then they only throw in a little bit of data, 1-degree edge bevels so that you don't have to, basically saying, yeah, we know our science. We got our shtick down. And I just think their whole site is beautifully told, simply told, but boy, do they know the skier. They've done a great job.
Yeah, the language they've used there is absolutely beautiful.
Now, is that unique to the Kiwis? Because I do find a lot of really good branding and interesting storytelling coming out of both Australia and New Zealand. Do you think they have a leg up on the rest of the world in any way?
I think what Kiwis and Aussies have, and they're completely different as well. So I have to say that here, or I will be absolutely lambasted.
Gotcha.
Kiwis and Aussies are hilarious to watch, especially when they're in the same room, because they absolutely love each other. But it's like those cousins that show up at Thanksgiving and punch each other in the arm and try to beat each other at flag football. Right. And then one gets a little bit in a strop when the other one loses. But Kiwis and Aussies both, and I don't know if it's because of where they're located in the world and because it's so far away, they've got this real can-do attitude about everything. They don't like to whinge. They don't like to whine. And they're very they've got a dry sense of humor that's also very quirky. And I think because they're not constrained by geography or by any kind of, it's even maybe peer pressure of being in the United States or Europe or anywhere else, they can just have a little bit more artistic freedom to be who they are. And I think, again, going back to just because the populations are a lot smaller too, specifically here in New Zealand, you most of the time know who you're doing business with, regardless of if it's a big business or a small business. I've been here a decade and a half, and there's not a day I walk down the street and don't say hello to 15 different people who I've worked with in the past. It's like a small town. So I really think that Kiwis and Aussies are maybe a bit more out there, but I think that's just inbuilt into who they are as a people. They like to have fun. They aren't afraid to be who they are. And I think maybe that's why I've been here so long. I absolutely love Kiwis and Aussies.
And I was just trying to remember a movie that came out earlier this year from New Zealand. I'm trying to look it up as we go here. Hunting for the Wilder People. Have you seen that?
Hunt for the Wilder People. That was
Hunt for the Wilder People. Yes.
Yes. That was what.
Oh my God, that's one of the best movies I've seen in 5 years, probably.
Yeah, and that's a local Kiwi guy who's now done Thor and done one of the biggest box offices in the entire world. So everybody knows Peter Jackson, but I think Taika will be the next big Hollywood director out of New Zealand. Hunt for the Wilder People is an absolutely hilarious, rollicking ride and a great piece of storytelling. And I think you can see a lot of those actors and actresses, again, walking down the street here. There's no ego in any of it. So, yeah.
So if you want to help advance that director's career, just get him on Business of Story, and I'll do all I can because I would love to talk to him.
I'll hook him up.
So my next question then, Cassie, is you have this really unique perspective of coming out of North America, USA, SoCal. You've got a story background and arts training. And now now you've been in New Zealand for quite a while. What could we learn from what you're seeing, how the New Zealanders go about work, life, and storytelling for their brands. What do you think some key takeaways that are lost on us Americans over here trying to do it?
When I come home, it's really interesting because I have been away so long. It's almost as if I am a visitor and a tourist in my own land. It is quite often times where I won't even know how to use the debit machines anymore, or pay for my coffee. And it's mind blowing. But one of the things that we like to do when we go home is the first night we land in California, wherever we are, is we will sit and watch some of the TV shows that we don't get here. And what we are actually looking for is the advertising that sits within that kind of, I guess, traditional TV structure. And what we don't see are any ads that make us want to like a brand or laugh or really connect emotionally. It seems that a lot of things are templated, and I don't know if it's because of legalities or if it's because of, the potential for something to go completely wrong at scale in the States. We just don't have the scale in New Zealand to, I think, worry about that a lot of the time. So that emotional connection, that wooing that you talked about, that romancing of the customer doesn't seem to really be there in the pop and drop ads. There's a lot more pharmaceutical ads back home. Even when I log onto Twitter or Facebook, going from Auckland to LA, the advertising is markedly different. And I think what Kiwis specifically here do very well is that they tell a really good brand story from that kind of macro level, because the micro is still being figured out a lot of the time here. And that's where people might say that we are, quote unquote, behind the times. But again, a lot of it comes back to population and expending a lot of budgetary effort on storytelling at a micro level probably won't pay as much here as a macro would. So,
and can you give us an example of that, of what you mean by telling a brand story at a macro level?
So just, going out and telling a complete brand story to almost all and sundry. So not a lot of hard targeting down into certain demographics or target audiences. I know I worked with Air New Zealand, and when I came on board with Air New Zealand, they had recorded and started to launch their first big brand campaign called Where to Next, which hit the domestic market. And it was an absolutely beautiful piece of visual and musical storytelling, and Kiwis really, really resonated with it. And I know the digital and social distribution amplification of that was more of a macro level. It was a big buy so that everybody can see it, instead of going super targeted and micro. Whereas I think in the States, there's a bit more nous or at least foundational learnings there than we have here.
That's really interesting too. And I'm sort of translating that as in the macro level, you are just like sharing, here's who we are. Here's a celebration of what we stand for. And we're just going to put it out for the world to take in. But in America, and we really profess, know thy audience. Where do they get their information? What kind of stories do you have to tell them? When and how do you tell them that stories? So it's not that you're not authentic. It's just you are now really scaled down to talking about one particular talent of the brand for that particular audience, and you're not getting the big picture. You're not getting the whole pie. You're getting a little slice of the pie of what the brand's
That's
about.
right. And when you come into it a little bit blind, like I would when I land in LA, because I haven't been served a lot of the pre-stories to that tactical, digital marketing, you kind of go, oh, okay, this could be relevant, but do I understand what this brand does? And do I know who these people are? And I think there's a huge opportunity in the States to go back to that. I always talk about Nike. I'm a huge Nike fangirl because I can still see Michael Jordan in his North Carolina colors and talking about the longevity of brand partnerships and what we're starting to call influencer marketing. I think influencer marketing's always been around. We've just got channels that are changing. But, Michael Jordan didn't change his shoe provider with every game or with every season. We just fundamentally knew that it was Nike. It was Nike, and we heard that Nike story. We knew the gist to it. And I think sometimes that gets lost a bit now in our more tactical, more targeted world.
Yeah, I think you're right. Have you read Phil Knight's book, his memoir called Shoe Dog?
Yeah, I loved it.
Oh, it's just amazing. And we were, in fact, before you this morning, I was downtown Phoenix with the president and CEO of the Phoenix Symphony, Jim Ward, who worked at Wieden & Kennedy for many years and on the Nike business and New Phil and all that. And the book came up again in that conversation too about just expert brand storytelling, not only from Nike's point of view, but you can see it started at the very top because Phil wrote this book over the course of, I think he said about 20 years. Maybe it's 8 years, but he kept going back and having to make sure that his stories were accurate. But it literally is like you were alongside of him from day one when he started thinking about what Nike could be before they even had the name to where it is today. It's just fabulous.
Yeah, I thought it was one of the best written books and thought, man, that must have been completely ghost written. And then, to learn otherwise, realize that.
I thought the same thing. We don't even give him credit, right?
What a great writer in his own right as well. I love that devoured Shoe Dog and probably will read it again.
Yeah, it's so worth it. And for those listening, if you really want to have a textbook case in fascinating business storytelling, read that book. It's just so well done. Now, Cassie, what are you doing these days? I see you are general manager of branded content for New Zealand's premier media company. Tell us who that is and what is that about?
That's right. So I'm, the general manager of branded content and content marketing for, it's called NZME, so New Zealand Media and Entertainment. And basically, the NZME is a bringing together of a lot of our traditional media channels. So there was a radio business, there was a print business that had all of our main newspapers together, and then there was a digital business. And the three of them came together just before I got here. And basically, my job is I sit on the commercial floor, but I work very closely with our editors. So I came here because for the last decade, I've been mostly working now in social media, and I wanted to branch back out to my passions. I love writing, journalism, and all of that. So what a better way to meld storytelling and brands with media. So I work alongside editors to look at potential, synergies and play in that gray area where branded content and brands can come on board with journalistic stories that maintain their integrity. It's absolutely fascinating being a part of a business that almost sets the agenda, that where that integrity and the audience is at the heart of everything that's done. And then also to work with brands to see how they could leverage a little bit of that as well from, a commercial partnership perspective. So that's what we do today. And I work across print and digital and radio and video and long form written content and data visualization, and you name it. It is no 2 days are the same and no two stories are the same. And it's an absolute pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure.
So you are that balance point between the journalist side with your media properties in radio, print, and digital, and then connecting those with the right brands, telling the right stories so that you're not muddying the journalism side, but the brands now can actually bring you content you can use versus just selling you something, which certainly in the end sells you something. But you are that gatekeeper, that director of traffic, if you will.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too is understanding that media can't be a pop and drop placement all of the time anymore. So you're not just buying a quarter page in a paper, or you're not just buying an ad lib on the radio. Brands are very smart these days and savvy, and want to understand how they can genuinely weave themselves into stories that they think will have a really good, will resonate, with their customers, as well as resonate with our audiences. So it's a really fun way to put puzzle pieces together to see, client objectives be met, results come through, and then have a happy and engaged audience on the other side. That's always what we work towards as the audience. I'm always about the human beings.
Always about the human beings. That's a good thing to always be about, by the way.
Yes. Always be about the human beings.
Well, Cassie, what do you look for then in a story that bridges these two worlds of journalism? And hopefully it's not fake news. You don't have any fake news in New Zealand. Apparently we only have it here in America. But what do you look for in stories that make brand storytelling really work?
I guess it, again, being all about the humans, is what's the human interest in it? if it's for a business audience, what is really going to make a business audience click through first and foremost, and then stay so engaged that they read an article or watch a video end to end. So for me, it's understanding the data and the insights. We've got amazing data and insights people here. So when we have a brief from a client, or an agency comes to us with a client brief, we really dig into the who, the why, and the how. And from that point, we then look into all of the different channels that we have and go, how would this fit in the most perfect way? Who should be telling this story? When and where do we distribute and amplify it from? So I think a lot of the time it's literally just sitting down, and a lot of the time it's head and heart. So it's analyzing the information, coming up with an insight, so utilizing the brain, obviously, and then knowing in your gut and in your heart from having told stories that resonate for a decade and a half now, how to marry those two together. Absolutely love it when it comes off just perfectly.
So in that description, thank you for that description, by the way, it feels very operational and functional. And I know you do something even more important than that, and that is to connect that business brand, especially if it's in the B2B world, to the human impact of that story. So how do you call out the humanity of a story when you've got a brand that shows up and says, okay, we've got the data, we know what the insights are, we know where we're going to tell a story, but so often that key is to actually connect a human story within that, an impact they've had on a real human being and what it meant to them, and therefore what it could mean to you, the audience. So how do you go about that and make sure that that happens?
So we go about that part in a very, very traditionally journalistic sense. We go about it as if, and we have journalists that work with my team as well on the commercial side of things who have been journalists for the last 30 years. We've got some super experienced storytellers who dig, they go out and they find the story. A lot of the time, it's great, you're right, to have the data and the insights, but how do you tell a story? How do you find something that is going to connect people emotionally? And that's where we put on our journalistic hat and we just dig in and go, where's the story? What is the story? What's our focus point going to be? And most of the time, if not all of the time, even a business story can turn into human interest, or it can turn into an educational piece. When we have data visualization, it's always going, great, that's really impactful and helpful, but what does this mean to the end user? What does this mean to the person who's going to be reading it? And will they tell somebody, over dinner or over a coffee about it? So that's kind of my super upper echelon, is if we write something that's going to be good enough for Park and Cassie to talk about over a podcast or over a coffee, then we're winning. So it's looking for those little nuggets of storytelling gold.
I heard some advice that I think works really well, at least it has for me, is that in typical brand marketing, in communication, we look at the how and the what. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we throw in the why, but it's like how and what. So features, functions, more or less, and change the how and the what to the when and the where. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, you've already got in your mind the context of what you're going to be talking about as far as a product service offering or brand service offering. So that's kind of your how and what, but it comes down to when and where has this had an impact. And it seems like once you start thinking about when and where, you are now naturally in humanistic narrative mode, because you're out of the jargon and the data and you're in real life events looking for that moment and then telling that story around the moment. So is your focus point often found within the moment of a pivot or an impact in someone's life?
Definitely, completely is. And it can be an impact in someone's life that's happened in the past, that's happening now, or it can even go alongside, I guess, just current trends. What's happening out there? Are elections happening in New Zealand? Is our new prime minister now overseas with the American president? All of these different things. Like, how do we tie everything back together so that that when and that where becomes the absolute context of the human story that's sitting there? It's definitely a fascinating juggling act to come up with, especially when because we do work in the media and because specifically the New Zealand Herald has to always maintain its journalistic integrity. We're unable to always weave in clients into a story. We can kind of set them around or outside a story. So it's that when and that where becomes a bit tricky at times, but the trickiness of it is, I think, also the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm. So for our listeners out there that aren't working in branded content to the extent that you are, where you're really in there with the journalists and the marketers, do you have, some tips, some pointers that they could kind of work on in their own storytelling to help really flesh out what makes a good branded content story?
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard was from a copywriter, a fellow called John Maxim, who I probably sat in a room with for an hour 6 years ago, and he was teaching a lot of brand marketers on how to create brand voice. And he basically said the secret to being a very, very good brand storyteller is being able to notice when you are putting yourself in the story or the brand voice too much, and to be able to step outside of it. It's almost like being an actor or an actress with different parts to play in different films, is understanding the voice of a brand first and foremost. What's the brand stand for? What do you stand for? What are the brand values? What's their backbone? And start there every time when you talk about a branded piece of content. Also, I know we've said it a few times, but I'm going to hammer it back home, is humans. Always, 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 I tell my team consistently, and I have for the last decade to all of my teams, to take off their marketing hats. Don't think in jargon. I like to call it Saturday speak. You and I aren't going to sit around on Saturday while we have, a cup of tea and speak in marketing jargon to each other, because that's not what normal humans do. So take off your marketing hat when you start to tell your stories, and think about what would resonate with you as a normal human, not a quote unquote marketer. And then I guess the third thing is always just have somebody who hasn't seen the work, or, is kind of from the outside, look at it and take constructive criticism, because a lot of the time as marketers, as storytellers, we get very emotional about what we create. And I think that's great. But I think it's also good to have somebody from the outside look at something and go, perhaps you could change this, or I didn't understand that, and always, continually do better.
Yeah. What final question for you, Cassie, before we actually name our panel event at Social Media Marketing World, is what are you most excited about today in what you're seeing happening in marketing in general?
I am so over the moon excited. And I've been saying this for probably the last 2 or 3 months about the fact that it feels like there's a renaissance of traditional marketing coming back and traditional storytelling. And what I mean by that is, for the last 5 or 10 years, we've all been looking at this bright, shiny new era of the internet and all of these social media channels, which I love and play a lot in and work in. But I think what we finally are coming back to, beyond this quick fix, tactical here and now piece, is that the most important thing you can do as a brand marketer is to think of the brand in the long term, and to continually have a layer of storytelling at all times underpinning what you're doing as a brand. I think it's so exciting that regardless of channel, brands are now coming to us and going, we want to work with you to do more storytelling. I actually think it's awesome and hilarious and beautiful and all of those things that when I go to meetings now, people shake my hand and go, oh, you're the storyteller. I think that's so superb, because brands get it and because humans get it. And I love that shift, that it feels like we are going back to an era of an importance of storytelling and having genuine and almost vulnerable relationships with brands.
Well, and that's funny too, because storytelling is what makes us uniquely human. We're all storytellers. That's what's taken us from caveman to consumer, is storytelling. And so I find it funny when people do show up and say, oh, you're the storyteller. Oh, you're going to teach me about storytelling. And I actually say, no, I'm just going to reignite it within you, because we were all at the tops of our storytelling games in kindergarten.
That's right.
And it just has been silenced. And so, you were fortunate. You had a Grandma Roma, that really taught you storytelling. I had that in Grandpa Red.
Oh.
He was a taxi cab driver in Seattle, and then started a bunch of little gas stations out in eastern Washington state. And man, could that guy tell a story. I was a little boy, and he was a big, tall, strapping redhead guy. And that's why they called him Red. And he could just tell a story. I would sit mesmerized by his side and listen to him. It was so much fun.
Yep.
All right, Cassie. Well, you and I get to do this together. I can't wait with Mira Rodriguez, storyteller from Microsoft. at Social Media Marketing World. We're going to have a panel on business storytelling, brand storytelling. What do you think we ought to call it?
Oh gosh, putting us on the spot. I don't know. Do we?
Right. Well, Phil put me on the spot, and I couldn't think of anything right off the bat. So I said, "Tell you what, I'm going to buy some time and talk to Cassie about it."
Well, I'm going to have to buy some time as well, because now I think it actually could be like a Bernie Taupin lyric or something. After our
ticking. Time is ticking.
But with that story, we definitely don't want to be in line.
Right. But I guess, folks, just look us up in the guide. It is going to be about brand storytelling, business storytelling, and how to actually really honestly do it. And it's not as hard as you think. It's just becoming more natural. As my good buddy Randy Olson says, it's like creating your narrative intuition is just see where stories come up in your life, where you trigger stories in other people. Capture those stories, archive them, and then for God's sake, use them to romance people instead of boring people. Because when was the last time you were bored into buying anything? Never.
Absolutely love that line. That is awesome.
All right. Cassie, how can people learn more about you and where can they find you online?
You can find me online at cassieroma.com. That's just a bit of my musings and blogs and vlogs and all of those kinds of things. Instagram is my actual social media bay. So again, that's at Cassie Roma. Same with Twitter, at Cassie Roma. Same with YouTube. I hope you see a little bit of a consistency there. And just happy to always answer any kinds of questions. Drop me a line, Cassie at cassieroma.com, and happy to help in any way possible.
Awesome. And are you ever going to return to the States for good?
This is something I would absolutely love to do. It all depends on raising a Kiwi child over here and the struggles of balancing two hemispheres. But the answer is hopefully yes.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I look forward to meeting you in person in February in San Diego for Social Media Marketing World. It's going to be awesome.
Same. And thank you so much, Park.
Thank you for being here. And thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. Of course, if I can be of assistance to you in any way, shape, or form, visit me over at businessofstory.com. And for crying out loud, if you haven't got your brand story straight, whether it's your personal brand story to grow your influence, your professional brand story to grow your cachet within your organization, or your organizational brand story, then download my workbook. It's 64 pages of goodness. I swear to God, we have examples in there. There's video tutorials to click over for, and I will help you clarify your story to grow your revenue and amplify your impact. And the reason why I do this podcast is I get to learn from really smart people like Cassie, so I can help coach you along that way too. So thank you for listening, and join us next week when we will have another story artist on to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And until then, remember, the most important story you are ever going to tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. See you then.